Joining me now is Oliver Farry from our international desk. Hello to you, Oliver. First of all, let's look at Biden's visit and his speech. What was the significance of this trip?
Well, Joe Biden used the visit to Warsaw, which was his second in the space of a year, to rally NATO countries together behind Ukraine. It was very much a theatrical affair, as is often the case with these overseas speeches by US presidents in front of 30,000 people at Warsaw's Royal Castle. And the timing, 11 months after his previous visit, was significant. It's to mark the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And the tone was quite bullish. There was a lot of goading of Russian President Vladimir Putin, whom Biden ridiculed for his failure to capture Ukraine as easily as expected. He said instead of an easy victory, he predicted Putin left burned out tanks and Russian forces in disarray. Biden also said that Russia would never prevail in the Ukraine war. One of Biden's main themes was the free world against dictatorship, saying perhaps somewhat prematurely that autocrats have grown weaker. Now, of course, many would point out that that's not really the case in certain parts of the world, and even the United States is quite comfortable with certain autocrats, such as Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi or Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, though that admittedly is something that the United States has been doing for a long time, selective relationships with autocratic regimes. But all in all, Biden's speech was a confident one, and it will give renewed morale to Ukraine and its people, just as his surprise visit to Kyiv on Monday did.
Yeah, in Vladimir Putin's speech, he didn't mention Joe Biden, but he did criticize the U.S. and the West a lot.
Yeah, Putin's speech was rambling, but in its own way, it had its coherence. It was a speech that was very much for a domestic audience, pitting Russia against a decadent, evil West. He evoked the Great Patriotic War, which is how the Second World War is known in Russia, and it's viewed with quite a different perspective as the Second World War is viewed in the West. Russia had by far the greatest civilian and military casualties during that war. He drew parallels between the Great Patriotic War and what Russia is doing in Ukraine now, even though it cannot bring itself to call what it's doing a war. It's a special military operation. There were also frequent mentions of Nazis, a popular line of Russian disinformation over the past 9 months, one that has been picked up in some quarters in the West, in which the Ukrainian government is supposedly a Nazi puppet regime. That wasn't the only piece of disinformation in the speech. Putin repeated the false charge that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky had called for a nuclear strike on Russia, and also that the US is developing biological weapons labs in Ukraine. There was also a litany of charges against the West where, quote, pedophilia is the norm, and where the American churches are putting up a gender-neutral God. These are familiar from previous speeches by Putin in the last year, and also from commentators on Russian state TV. And Putin said that the West wanted to be rid of Russia once and for all, and the intention is clear: to pit Russia against its enemies in the West, and particularly play to a conservative, older Russian audience. But there was also a substantial consequence in Putin's speech. He announced that Russia would be withdrawing from its last existing treaty with the United States, the New START treaty on nuclear arms reduction, which was signed by Presidents Barack Obama and Dmitry Medvedev in 2010. Russia's lower house, the Duma, has already voted this morning to withdraw from it, with the Federal Council set to do likewise later today.
All right, Oliver. Thank you very much, Oliver Farry, from our international desk.